Let's look at using Kali Linux for, in this case, doing some basic port scanning. And I'm going to log in here, and I haven't changed any of the defaults. So I'm running this as a virtual machine. So I need to make sure I click in the VMware window, and I'll use root for the username. Root is the typically the administrative account on a Linux box, and Tor, or root spelled backwards, is the default password for the root account. So here's the graphical version of Kali. Now, on your installation, if you don't like the size of the window, you can go over here to, you click on, looks like a power switch, and come down here where there's like a screwdriver and a wrench. Click that. That'll open up settings. Takes a second or two. Come down. Let's see. We want devices, I think. Yeah. Devices, displays, and you can click on resolution. You can play around with this, come up with something that you like for your particular monitor configuration. So this is the graphical user interface, and we have a toolbar, taskbar over here. If you go up here to the top left, click Applications, you'll find that there's a large number of applications that have already been installed here, and also grouped by general functionality, what we're trying to do with these. And the first entry here is information gathering. So if you look down through here, here is nmap, or network mapper. This here is nmap. I'm going to click on it. This is it's a graphical front end for nmap. And if you're following along the instructions that come with the online book, you can do all these things from a command line, and we might do that here in a moment. Matter of fact, let's just go on and do that. I'll just minimize this. On your toolbar, taskbar here, the second item down here is terminal. And once you get good at Linux, you'll find yourself doing a lot of things with terminal. As a matter of fact, even on a Windows box, I keep a command line, command prompt box pinned to my start menu, or excuse me, well, start menu and taskbar, because it's certain number of things that you really need to do from the command line. So, following the instructions, and I think this is maybe the first lab or the second lab, you'll figure it out. Let's run nmap. First you have to spell it properly. Nmap, and I'm going to do this is a SYN scan. And if memory serves me well, the dash V there says it means verbose. You can check all the options out. I'm going to use the IP number that's specified in these labs, and I have no idea who or where this is. So press enter. So from here, our little report here, looks like we scanned, the default was 1,000 ports, and we found thought it said 4 of them are open. Where did I see that? So far, it's just showed me 3 of them. 443 is that's uh, the secure web server port, I believe. If memory serves me well. Of course, port 80 is typically a web server. Port 21 is FTP. FTP, the control port. So this has told us quite a bit right away. And the reason you're doing port scanning is, well, if you're a bad guy, you want to know what services are running on this particular box. So here's the final report. 21's open FTP, 80, that's of course HTTP, 113, that's closed, that's ident. We can look at that here in a moment. 443 is the secure web service, typically. Now, there's no guarantee that the ports that are open on the remote machine are really what nmap thinks they are. These are just typical. And I would put a lot of faith in this because people don't often change what's running on a particular port. They usually just take the defaults. But getting back to what I was saying a few moments ago, the reason you'd be interested in running a port scan is, number one, if you're a bad guy, you want to know what's running on the target machine. So from here, we've discovered that on 136, on the machine that's using IP number 136.142.35.137, FTP is running. Okay, now FTP is various FTP applications, and there's different ones. There's been several issues with FTP, the FTP service back through the years, so that's interesting to know. And of course, port 80 here is the web server. Now, typically, if this is a Linux box, and you'll discover here before long that it's usually pretty easy to pin down whether this is the target is a Linux box or a Windows box. But if it's a Linux box, and actually I bet it was, this is probably running Apache, the Apache web server. So that's something that an attacker can use. And what we would do if we were an attacker is we would say, okay, we need FTP. We need to go find an exploit for FTP, or maybe probably Apache, and see if we can find an exploit. Now, an exploit is some code that would take advantage of a vulnerability in a particular service that's available across the network. So in this case, this FTP service is available across the network. We could actually telnet, or excuse me, FTP into this this particular server right here. I'm going to try that here in a moment. So this is available. If we can find an exploit for whichever version of the FTP service is running on this box, and it hasn't been patched, we could potentially compromise this computer across the network using a vulnerability in one of these services that are listening. Have an open port. So that's what we're interested in as an attacker. Now, from the standpoint of, if we're a good guy, and this is our network, we want to port scan our computers to find out what is running on each of them, because a lot of times, well, at least sometimes, there might be a service running on one of your computers that you're not aware of. This has been several years ago, but I think it was Windows Server 2000. If you install Server 2000, it automatically installed the Internet Information Service, the IIS, which is Microsoft's web server. It, whether you told it to or not, it installed it. So there was an internet worm that took advantage of that service being running and vulnerable to a particular exploit, and it caused a lot of trouble. So there were people that would say, well, this attacks the web service, and I'm not running a web server. Well, yeah, you are. You didn't know it, but you were. So from a good guy standpoint, you want to know what's running on your computers and make sure that you shut down or otherwise block using firewalls as much as you can from the outside. So those are the reasons, both good and bad, that you'd want to do port scanning, and it's something you really need to understand. Let's spend a few moments looking at how port scanning works. So go back to my applications menu here, and let's see, information gathering, let's see, vulnerability analysis. I'm looking for Wireshark, which is under sniffing and spoofing. Come on. If you've never used Wireshark, and it's free, by the way, you can download it. It runs on Windows as well. You really should pick, or you'll take some time and get some experience with this. Now, this is a little warning here that I'm getting because I'm running this as the root account. That's super users on Linux is another way of saying the root account. So that's okay. So here's what I'm going to do. This is the port. Now you can actually enter a capture filter. You can also enter a display filter. We won't worry about filtering right now. But I'm going to use the Ethernet 0 port on. This is on the computer that I'm, the Kali box. I'm going to click this. That'll start a capture. Now, we'll go back over here. Now, the terminal here has a memory, so I'm just going to hit the up arrow and pull that command again, press enter, and rerun that scan. And then I can look over here at what I'm capturing with Wireshark and tell you what's going on. So we'll let it go on and finish. And then I'll show you what nmap is really doing for you. It's generating a lot of packets and sending them to this 136, 142, 35, 137 machine. And then it's interpreting the response back from that computer. I think we can go on and look at this while it's finishing up its report. So I'm going to maximize this. Now, by default, Wireshark colorizes its packets. I'm going to go on and stop this. It colorizes these packets. I don't really like the colors. Now, you might. It's entirely up to you. Well, let's see if we can go on with the colors. Now, probably a good thing to know here would be, let me just minimize this for a second. So we got the same results we did a while ago. Let me show you something. Since this is on a Linux box, I'm going to run the command ifconfig. That's interface configuration. If you were doing something like this from a Windows box, you would run ipconfig and then a slash and all. What I'm interested in here, what's the IP number of this particular installation of Kali? And it's 192.168.203.129. This came from the virtual DHCP server that's installed as part of VMware, since I'm running this as a virtual machine. Yours is probably going to be different. But the reason I wanted to know what that is, and I'll show you here in a second, remember the IP number we just looked at, 192.168.203.129. This is Kali, my Kali, and that, of course, is the target machine that we're running nmap against. And the first packet here is just a ping request packet. It's ICUP protocol. It's a ping request, and I don't see a reply. It's probably on down here, but I think here you go. That's just the ping reply. I'm more interested in what's going on with these other packets. Now, here's an example. And another thing here that I would do, you can see here under info what's right here. This is coming from Kali, going to the target machine. Notice right here under info, 43906. Now this is the TCP port that my Kali is using as the source IP, the source TCP port. And the 443 is the destination port on that machine. So that's the send packet for that. And if you look, let's see, can we find that? Let's see. Here you go. This is the response packet right here. This is the response back from 136, 142, 35, 137. From port 443 back to the source port on Kali, it's sending back a SYNAC packet. Well, that's the second part of the TCP three-way handshake that takes place when you're establishing a TCP connection. This tells nmap that port 443 is listening on the target machine. Now, just to be nice, Kali turns around and sends a reset packet and just shuts down the connection instead of completing the connection. But that's how this SYNAC that comes back here that's why I don't like the colors. This reset is back from port 80, the response from the target machine. So it gets confusing here with all these colors. But this is the reset that basically terminates this attempted connection. So this is how nmap knows that port 443 is open. First, you get a send packet from Kali to the destination. Then from the destination, or the target, you get back a SYNAC packet that tells nmap that that port is open. And then nmap goes on and shuts the port down, kills the connection. Let's look at another one here. For example, this is coming from Kali using a different port, source TCP port. This is going to the target, of course, to port 3306. Now, you look down through here, you're not going to find a SYNAC coming back from the target from port 3306. You won't find it. So if you don't get a response back, one of two things happens here. If there is a firewall between my Kali and this target, you won't get anything back properly. You should just get nothing. If there's not a firewall, you should get back a reset ACK. Now, this 113, I think that was one of the ports that we got a hit on. That wasn't at the ident port. Let's look back here. Yeah, see the ident port came back as closed. See, right now we're showing source IP number, destination IP number. Port information's over here. You can add another column here for source port and destination port, and then you can actually sort on these. If I clicked on this, it's going to sort on destination address, which makes it easier to find things. So, getting back to what we're doing here, see all these, what nmap is doing, it's generating packets and sending them to the target, send packets to all these ports. These are TCP ports that might be open, like TCP port 3389. This is the remote desktop. This is a Microsoft thing. 135 is also Microsoft typical port. I don't know what 8888 is off the top of my head. I'd have to look it up. But so what nmap is doing is picking some common points. That's a Microsoft port as well, 445. Of course, 443, that's the secure web server. We should get a response back from that. 111 might be POP. I can't remember. Post Office Protocol. See, we got a response back. Well, this is actually shutting down that port, the connection to port 21. That's TCP. That's the control port of TCP. Data ports is TCP is port 20. So anyway, that's what's going on here with nmap. This is what, and the only reason I'm showing you this in Wireshark is I want you to see what the packets really look like, or well, mostly what they look like, or what's being sent, and why it's, what nmap is doing and what it's looking for in return. Now, students always get confused, and they'll say, well, to port scan, you have to run Wireshark. No, you don't. Nmap is sufficient for doing port scanning, and there's actually other tools that'll do this. The only reason I ran Wireshark is to show you what the packets look like. What nmap is looking for. So I get really frustrated when students say, well, we're going to run Wireshark and we're going to port scan. No, you don't have to run Wireshark to port scan. Okay? I just want you to see what's going on. So get it out of your head that you have to run Wireshark to do port scanning. You don't. All you need is nmap. Now, in our case, we run nmap from the command line, and there's a pretty elaborate manual that goes with this, and there's a lot more things you can do with this. Now, what I showed you earlier, this is nmap. This is just a GUI front end for nmap. So you can put your target in here and do different types of scan. The advantage here is you don't have to remember what all these little switches mean. Recall, these are called switches. This sets up a send, scan, etc. With ZenMap, you can pick out several of the default here without having to remember what it looks like. So that's what the switches are for that one. Why we didn't get anything there. Did scan. I was just looking for the one we just ran. Ooh, look at that one. That's a slow, comprehensive scan. Look at all those switches. So anyway, we can get the same thing going on here using this front end, and it's you can save your results. You can, if you were going to do this against your network, and you should regularly, you could save your target and the the type of scan you wanted to run, and um, just run it once a week or whatever. And the reason you'd want to do this is, in a lot of cases, if one of your computers is compromised, um, the code that compromised your computer could set up some sort of back door that would be listening on one of your computers, so that the whoever compromised it could communicate with it. Of course, a lot of times they'll use already open ports and basically take over the application that's listening on that port. But it could be that something would open up another port on one of your computers, and you'd of course want to know that. So it's a good idea not only to scan your computers, but scan them regularly, port scan them. So I think this is probably a pretty good place to stop this particular video. So just as a review, we ran nmap here from the command line, just following the instructions in one of these labs, I think maybe lab 2, and we found out that this target machine here, that FTP is open. There seems to be a web server running here. Of course, this is also a web server port. And one more thing I mentioned a while ago, that we could probably connect to this. So let's just try it. It's not going to hurt anything. We'll spend a moment doing it. Let's see if I remember how to do command line FTP. So I'm just going to FTP, run FTP and use that IP number. Okay, bash not found. Not to play around with that. Yeah, I used to. Probably what's happened here on Kali, we haven't installed the FTP service, so therefore it can't find that. If I think about it, I'll try to install FTP on this so I can use that. But if you've got the right application on your computer, you can actually connect to a remote FTP service from the command line. This is things we had to routinely do back in the old days. So anyway, I'll play around with that. So to review, we ran nmap here. This was our target, and I don't know where that was at, but based on the packets that were sent. Now, the packets that were sent were SYN packets, synchronized, SYN packets. The first part of the three-way handshake required for establishing a TCP connection. So nmap sent these, and it looked at the responses that came back. If nmap gets back a response from a particular port of a SYN-ACK, a SYN, and then an acknowledge flag set on a packet, then nmap knows that that port is open. Something's listening on that particular port, so nmap notes that. If we get no response back, either the port is closed and or filtered, some combination of that, but there was no response. Typically, what you would get back is, most of these are just filtered. If you get back immediately a reset ACK packet, that means that the port is closed. Most of these are being filtered by a firewall, so we're getting nothing back. Just dropped packets. And again, Wireshark is not necessary for this whole process. I just wanted you to see what was going on in the background. So I think that's a good place to stop this particular video on port scanning.